Yes, my prof, we are very pleased once again to have you. And I just have a question, and then that question is direct to, it is obvious on what we have been planning, the placement of women in leadership, you know, entire Africa, we understand that the population of the world, or let me just streamline it to where we are, Africa. The population of Africa, when it comes to women, it's like almost 98%. 98%, while that of men are like 78%. Women take this kind of rate, and yet they are very, very, the micro exercise of women in leadership is quite obvious. Their voice are not heard, and we don't know why it's like that. And we want to build Africa. We want to know the women's placement in African leadership.
Let me preface my remarks by saying that I claim no expertise, but I claim curiosity. And in talking about this subject, it cannot be denied that your typical so-called African nation is a very young nation. In terms of Ghana regaining her independence in 1957. And we must recognize the artificiality of the African nation and the fact that we inherited structures of governance that were very Eurocentric. And in their Eurocentricism, they also undermined the role of the African woman. But if you look at the history of Africa, which history we must revisit and reactivate, the woman occupied a very central place in the daily lives of the African. And I'm not trying to be romantic about this. If you look at the Amazon women in Africa, if you look at some of the women leaders, there was a role for women. But post-independent Africa has been very patriarchal. And the patriarchy has been seen particularly and visibly in the political arena. In the political arena, because of the manner in which we conduct politics, the environment is very poisonous for women. But I think that we are now beginning to recognize that you cannot ignore 52% of your population who are the real guarantors of the economy. And allow me a little latitude. If you look at Africa, which is a very rural, you will discover that it is the woman who is the foundation stone upon which the family rests. And therefore, Africa will only realize our potential when the African woman is given the pride of place in the pyramid of decision making. And there are a number of countries that are beginning to recognize that reality. Rwanda is such a country. By deliberate action on the part of the Rwandese government, we now know that over 50% of the Rwandese cabinet are women. We recently saw that in Ethiopia, the head of state is a woman. And one is not saying that we must pick women simply because they are women. These are women who have demonstrated by what and did that they are capable of delivering. And we who are in the public space must now move to demonstrate and to convince the populace that indeed when women are given the opportunity to serve, then they serve in a manner that is dedicated and in a manner that underpins holistic development of the society. So going forward, and I say going forward without, as I've said, and at the risk of repeating myself, without romanticizing the role of women, what we must do is to ask ourselves, how do we take deliberate efforts to ensure that women are put in places where they can play a complementary role. And the word complementary is very critical in this regard. It is not as if we are saying that when women begin to serve, then men are in the back burner. They must work together. There is a very beautiful academic paper that has been written by Professor Sylvia Tamale of the Makerere University, and the title of the paper is When Hens Begin to Crow. And what Sylvia is saying, that when women begin to play their rightful place in the society, then the society begins to realize our full potential. And the last point that I want to make in my response in this regard is in the context of the fight against COVID. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, you look at Finland, you look at Denmark, you look at Norway, and you go beyond the Scandinavia, and you go to Germany, and you go to New Zealand. Commentators are now saying, whether they are right or wrong, the jury is still out. But on a preliminary basis, they are saying that where women have been at the helm, the manner in which they have responded to this pandemic called COVID has been better than where men have been involved. And you men who are present in this assembly, I'm not demeaning you, but there appears to be some evidence that where women are given pride of place in leadership, they do a good job. And perhaps it is because we doubt them so much, they redouble their efforts. And I think post-corona, we Africans must make a deliberate effort to ensure that our sons, our daughters, and mothers, and grandmothers, and aunties, and our wives are not behind us, but are with us shoulder to shoulder. I hope that is that dramatic silence, or is technology that is undermining us?
It's technology.
Yeah, this question is from India hero Derek. Does he really say, that is you, Prof, does he really think having equal representation of both men and women will help Africa? Yet men still dominate the decision-making process.
There is, Professor Nana Kobina Nkesia, whom I commend for you to read. Professor Nana Kobina Nkesia was a professor at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, and is a traditional ruler also in Esikadi in Ghana. He's written a very beautiful book, African Governance, the Ghanaian Paradigm. And the reason why that book is useful to me is that he begins to raise critical questions about governance. Many African governments are caught up in what I call the Eurocentric approach to governance. And the Eurocentric approach is that we have a democracy which is defined for us. And democracy means that we must have periodic elections. It means that we must have multi-party politics. It means that we must have parliamentarians, and those parliamentary models, depending on who colonized Africa, is either fast past the post-election as we inherited from the United Kingdom, or proportional representation. And in a number of countries now, after 1989, we now recognize, because of the patriarchal nature and the violent nature of our politics in Africa, we have to create women-only seats. And in that way, we think that women are going to be represented. The question that it then begs, when we talk about leadership, is leadership only confined to politics? And my answer is no. Politics is important because it is the more visible. It is the arena where decisions are made. And therefore, it is critical that women must be represented in that arena. And history has demonstrated that unless we introduce what I call hygiene in our politics, where issues determine who is elected, not money and violence or clanism and ethnicity, then women will always be disadvantaged if you take that route. But the other thing is, outside of the political arena, and I'll come back to the political arena, you go into the private sector. If you go into the private sector, historically, even in Africa, where private sector is a very small, they are very small minority represented in Africa. If you go to East Africa, the majority in the private sector who control the private sector in East Africa, whether it's Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, they are Indians or aliens who are non-indigenous indigens of Africa. If you go to Southern Africa, white monopoly capital is still very strong. If you come to West Africa, in countries such as Sierra Leone, in countries such as Liberia, there is a very heavy Lebanese presence. But if you go into the private sector, women are not represented. Women are not represented in the boardrooms. If you go into the academic arena, there is also a sense in which women are not represented. So going forward, without dominating the conversation, I am saying that having recognized that women constitute an important and an integral part of the population, what deliberate efforts must we make to ensure that women are represented? In the electoral process, there are different methods. Proportional representation. And if you look at the South African Parliament, for example, which goes through the process of proportional representation, the zebra method, you see that women are represented quite visibly in the political arena. If you go to Rwanda, which I've already mentioned, by deliberate effort on the part of the administration, women are represented. If you go into countries such as Uganda, deliberate efforts are being made. So what I can say is that we must now tell ourselves, and beyond telling ourselves, convince ourselves, and beyond convincing ourselves, resolve, and beyond resolution, implement actions that will ensure that women are given their pride of place in all sectors of the economy and in all sectors of governance. And in this way, our decision-making processes will be enriched. And in that way, I think that Africa will begin to realize our potential. This must be deliberate, this must be consistent, this is not for the faint-hearted, this will be, as it were, swimming upstream, because we are largely still a very patriarchal people.
Very much favor. Thanks, Prof. I mean, I've been writing away here seriously because this is more like a breath of fresh air. So the acceptance that there is a problem that needs to be fixed, for me, is always a good start. The other bit is the challenging of self and challenging of where the monopoly of power is. And I'm really moved by the passion that you've applied to the way you've answered some of the questions. Yes, you have really emphasized the deliberate, intentional, something that you have to stop and do. Because we do know that if you allow things to happen the way they are, it will take 200 years for us to even get there. Never mind in Africa, it might be 500 years. So I really like that approach to intentionality. I guess I'm just thinking, where do we start? And how do we start it like now? Because you're really emphasizing deliberate, being artificial. It means stopping things and starting. What do you see as the first step to stopping things and that deliberateness? I'm very pleased to hear the business case, and I kid you not, I have been very exercised by COVID and implications for the world, implications for humanity, the role of women. And I'm so glad that you have highlighted those components. But for me is if I was to say to you, we close our eyes and start, please tell us where and how do we start? Looking at some of the issues you've talked about, the ego, the threat, the feeling that if they do it, they take over. How do we start? Please, just take us from that point on, please.
Thank you very much for that intervention. You know, let me give this a little historical context, because I believe that a historical context sometimes is always very important in order to appreciate the present and the future. And I remember so very vividly a speech that was delivered by Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, I think in 1957 in Casablanca, Morocco, and he repeated the same thing on the 31st of December, 1961. And he said, and I paraphrase, that if Africa is to know economic development, there must be a new African man and a new African woman. And how I understood the Osagyefo was that we ought to have a total revolution of the mind. And the new mind that we must have is a mind that says, if you want and recognize that decision-making is at the very heart of the growth of human society, then your best men and women must be present at the decision-making table. And how do we ensure that that happens? In my view, there is now a case for Africa to redefine her politics. Easier said than done. To redefine our politics by ensuring that political processes are put in place which deliberately make it possible for both genders to be present at the table of decision making. Can it be done? It can be done. Has it been done? It has been done. South Africa, which I already talked about a little earlier, after 1984, adopted an electoral system which said it is proportional representation, which does the following things. One, it strengthens the political party. You have a party list where your constitution says you will have the number of members of parliament as dictated by the vote that you get. But your party list says man, woman, man, woman, man, woman, man, woman, the zebra system. Whatever you do, you'll have 50-50 women. If you want to introduce youth and persons with disability, you can do it. Once you do that, in other words, I'm now saying that going forward, this idea of first past the post politics, which is the breeding ground for political corruption, which is the breeding ground for clanism and ethnicity and violence, we must rethink about it. Because the day we sanitize our politics, that is the day we'll begin to move in the right direction. Whenever politics stumbles, the nation pays. So deal with politics. Then we come to the economic arena. We make it a deliberate effort that if you are running quasi-governmental institutions, there must be a deliberate effort that when you are constituting your boards without compromising and sacrificing expertise, make sure that the composition is gender sensitive and gender balanced. That is already happening in a number of countries. And once again, to go back to politics, when you are constituting your cabinet, and that is already happening in countries such as Rwanda, and I know it is happening in countries such as Tanzania, and it's happening in quite a number of countries, make sure that that is done. And when you go into other systems of governance, you now begin to do it and you cascade it from the top to the bottom. The results will not be dramatic and will not be immediate. But what we'll begin to see is that you'll have mainstreamed a critical mass in the decision-making processes. Once we begin to do that, and once we ensure that we are now beginning to do things that are designed to ensure that we improve the quality of the lives of our people and everybody is on board, so that we are not engaged in tokenism where we appoint women as tokenists. We create women-only seats. I am a great opponent of these things called women-only seats. Those are useless seats because after a short time, men begin to say, that is for women. It's tokenist, it's an insult to women. We must have women in the mainstream. Once we begin to do that, you'll begin to recognize that women have the talent, and we have no shortage of women in Africa today in this day and age. I speak to many women across the world, African, and you will be amazed. Some of the best minds in Africa are women. If we begin to do that, and women, part of our problem is inferiority complex, sugar-coated with superiority complex, informed by insecurity. The day we liberate ourselves from those chains, that is the day we'll begin to serve our societies effectively. That is my long answer to a rather short question. I'm becoming Fidel Castro as I grow older, it would appear.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Wow.
Short, long, and I don't know how to call it.
Doctor. Okay, you're freezing. Okay, we'd like to have a question from Patricia Mensah. Hey,
Yes.
Doctor, are you there? Patricia Mensah from Ghana.
I'm here.
Okay, can you allow Patricia Mensah from Ghana to ask a question? While you
Please.
Ngoni from Zimbabwe, she has a question. They've been typing, let them ask their question. So quickly, call Patricia Mensah while Ngoni waits, then after that, Christina, then Kinsley, so that we can move.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atai. Thank you very much, Professor Lumumba. I really admire you. I'm very passionate about leadership and how we can foster the growth of women leaders in Africa. My question, I'll paraphrase it because it ties in with what Dr. Ashibon said about being deliberate. You've spoken at length regarding what those in politics, those in business need to make intentional in terms of giving women the opportunity to lead. But I was looking at it from this aspect. After we have inspired and motivated women to take on these leadership positions, they still get to that forefront where derogatory remarks about their place in society. Let me use the issue of where women are either receiving insulting comments about whether or not they're married. When a woman is married and they want to go into leadership, they are then pressured into deciding whether to keep their home as a married woman or go into leadership. When they are single, they are also being abused in terms of they not being seen as a full woman worth their salt, despite the talents and potentials that they have to push and make progress in our society. So would you recommend that these intentional decisions start from the bedrock in the educational system, right from the basic educational system, so that both men and women, our boys and girls, will start appreciating the value each other brings to the table, and that the he for she agenda becomes mainstreamed right from that level, and not when people have already made up their minds, as it were. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me hazard an answer first by giving this very African analogy. And this is what I say, that an elephant must carry its tusks in the forest and still receive accusations. When you are a woman, you know, being a woman is a permanent state. When you are a woman, you are a woman. When you are a man, you are a man. And as long as society is patriarchal, in the early days, one of the ways in which we put women down is to say all manner of things. And I'm quite certain wherever you are, when you get something on merit, we are quick to say, no, it was not merit. When you say it was other things. I think that once you become immune from such, then you look at the bigger picture, you begin to forget the critics. And I can't agree with you more that the manner in which we are socialized is very critical, which brings into view the question of education in Africa. We inherited education systems which were essentially designed to serve the whites. I do not know whether you have ever read the constitutive documents of the famous Achimota College in Ghana. You must read the papers that were prepared to justify the creation of the Achimota College, and that could be said of any other college in Africa. It was meant to produce a disciplined African man for purposes of serving the white person. If you ask any of our African leaders of African education ministers, why have we created our universities? What is the raison d'etre of the University of Ghana at Legon? What is the reason for the existence of the University of Nairobi, or the University of Witwatersrand post-apartheid, of the University of Anta Cheikh Diop in Senegal? They will not tell you. So education must deliberately be designed to produce a man and a woman who thinks in a particular direction. A man and a woman who thinks that the purpose of education is to liberate you from ignorance. And a man and a woman who thinks that the mind is the standard of the man and the woman. Once you begin to think that the mind is the standard of the man or the woman, then gender is simply nature for purposes of the species. And I think that that is one of the things that we must do. If you look at traditional African society, and because we are oral society, sometimes we don't do great justice to ourselves. But if you went to some of the matriarchal societies, and there were a lot of matriarchal societies in Africa. You go to Malawi, there was great matriarchy. You go to Lesotho, there was matriarchy. You go to Eswatini or Swaziland, there was matriarchy. And in those institutions, before we were rudely interrupted by the Europeans, you would find that a woman was given her pride of place. But we don't want to romanticize history. We are now living in a different dispensation. You and me who are now conversing today, when I look at you and I look at other women, what is the most important thing? If you are a lawyer, I see the lawyer in you. If you are a doctor, I want to see the doctor in you. If you are an engineer or a computer scientist or a business person, I want to see that in you. And progressively, because we don't document positive things, many times we document the negative. So as I speak to you now, one of the leading women that I work with, some of the leading women that I converse with on a daily basis, One is in Zimbabwe. One of the biggest women farmers, I don't want to call them women farmers, is in Zimbabwe, a farmer in Zimbabwe. One of the leading philanthropists that I know is a Tanzanian woman who is based in the United States of America. One of the leading intellectuals that we are working with in areas of human rights is a Ghanaian who is resident in Howard in Atlanta, Georgia. So, and another one is a Cameroonian woman who is in Tübingen in Germany. And there are many others on the continent of Africa who are serving. So this conversation is important, not to do anything unique, but to tell us men, because it is we who are the problem. When we are inadequate, then we descend into the low levels of insult and undermining women. It is men that must liberate ourselves. And as I said a little earlier, when you see a man trying to degrade and undermine a woman, it is actually inferiority complex, which is camouflaged and looks like superiority complex.
Come on. I hope I'll be I hope I'll be able to have my dinner tonight, Prof. This is getting interesting more and more. Madam Patricia, I hope you've listened to Prof, how he was able to, put the truth out there for everyone. My Prof, thank you so much for giving us all this, integral message.
Yes, Ngoni, she's been writing a question, typing it. Ngoni, I think she'll be from Zimbabwe. Are you there?
Ngoni and Patricia, let me say that there is a sense in which in the early days you've got to live with this pain. That because we are coming from a tradition where women were kind of stereotyped and expected to play certain roles, there is a sense in which as you begin to break the ceiling and to break the walls and to get into roles which men in their parochial view said that these are only for men, you will be seen as an outsider. But those are the early days. So the pioneering women will have to bear the brunt of these criticism, of these doubts. But as we begin to have more women and as women begin to perform, and remember what a woman does is judged negatively a lot more. A woman has to work twice as hard as a man in order to be accepted to be doing well. So my view is that the pioneering women must be thick-skinned, and they must have men who believe in them. And that is why an initiative such as this by my very good friend is a good initiative. So that if there is a story to be told, don't rely on your fellow women to tell the story. If there is anybody to protect you, it is we men who have been won over who must protect you. It is us who must rise up and say to our fellow men, that woman who was appointed to be the head of Nestle is not appointed because she's a woman. She is appointed because she's an intelligent human being with the ability to deliver. She will deliver. Give her the opportunity to deliver. Support her. Give her the time and space, and let us judge her by her efforts. Wole Soyinka of Nigeria used to say it very well, that a tiger does not shout about its tigritude. You follow the path of a tiger and you see the skeleton of an antelope and you know that some tigritude has emanated there.
I wish to direct my question to Professor, but first I wish to appreciate the sharing and Definitely, women everywhere have been appreciated, but there's a question I have in my mind. I wish to direct it to Professor. How do we balance between the Africa's women placement in leadership with the boy child, whereby in the current century we've been having movement, feminist movement that are promoting culture to an extent that they have forgotten the boy child completely. Are we going to have leaders, women leaders who are very well educated with all the whatever it is, it matters, but then we have men in the society who can't help the same women that they're providing the leadership? Thank you.
Mutuma, I hear you, and I know where you are coming from. You know, because of the historical disadvantages that women suffered over a long period, there was a period when we focused a lot on the girl child. And there is now evidence, you are speaking from Kenya and I'm from Kenya, there is now evidence that is beginning to demonstrate that the boy child appears to be disadvantaged in certain areas because we have emphasized too much on the girl child who was historically disadvantaged. I think the girl child became a focus because of affirmative action. And the argument then was that if you looked at many African societies, women were not going to school, women were not, if you look at this primary school, the transition from primary to secondary school for girls was not as great as it was for boys, from secondary to the university and other technology institutions. And in countries such as Botswana and Namibia, this became an argument. And in countries such as South Africa, you found more women getting into professional courses and women getting into mining and those areas. I think we must balance. We now know that when you emphasize a lot more on one gender to the detriment of the other, then you begin to create a situation where the girl child is now favored to the detriment of the boy child. And the natural reaction, and I'm using the word natural very guardedly, is that the natural reaction of the boy child is that they become less confident, they become insecure, and therefore violent. So they are experts better than I in this regard. If I was asked, because we know that this was a historical problem, we've got to ask ourselves, when do we begin to stop? So that not to stop in that way, when we begin to de-emphasize and begin saying that it is the girl child and we simply say the child. And once we begin to say the child, we then treat the boy and the girl in a similar way and give them opportunities. And once we give them opportunities without due regard to their gender, then we will solve this problem. African nations post-independence are very young. Just let us look at the child. Let us give them opportunities. We know that the girl child will be disadvantaged in certain areas. And these are areas that have been identified. And the women in this forum will know. For example, when women get into puberty, we now have to take into account. We've got to take care of the girl child so that they don't miss class because they are in their menstrual periods. That is unique to the girl child. So once all these things are taken into account, Mutuma, I have no doubt in my mind that the boy child will not be disadvantaged. The society will be stronger because we are dealing with the child regardless of gender, but alive to their unique needs.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, my wonderful Prof.
Can we have Barrister Mary Consilia from Cameroon for a question while waiting for our doctor? Barrister Mary Consilia.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, this is Mary Consilia Anchang. I'm a lawyer. Also the founding president of the African Chamber of Trade and Commerce, very intriguing. I want to first of all very much thank Honorable Dr. Elisha and the professor for organizing this come together. It's been very inspiring. I've been triggered by the definition of leadership and women's role in society. And after listening to the very exhaustive explanation of the professor, I have been asking myself some questions as to how we make men become more comfortable with women in leadership positions. And I'm questioning whether the word leadership should not be redefined, because I have the impression that the word leadership makes men so scared. As he finally puts it, some kind of inferiority complex that is actually sugar-coated with superiority complex, and the woman is shouted down at and looked down at, to the extent that you wonder what you have done wrong, or if in all what you were trying to do was not the right thing. I am thinking that if men and women begin to realize the potential that is natural in women, which is their multifunctionality. The woman is by nature multifunctional. It shouldn't be a scare to anybody. It should be something that we live with and we accept. And if we are able to relook into leadership as result-oriented, as to what we define as the package that comes with leadership, maybe it would turn things around, and it will be more humbling for whoever wants to be a leader to look into he or she, her capacity to deliver the result, the expected result from the position. Otherwise, leadership is just that conventional terminology. Yes, it is for great people, it's for people who are achievers. But when it comes to the he for she, which is a new concept, which is actually advocated by the UN, and great minds are actually contemplating on how we put women in the focus and how we get women get the best out of themselves, and how society benefits from what women really are endowed with and that they can provide for society.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kingsley Dogwan. I'm calling from Lagos, Nigeria. So thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much, Dr. Atai, for inviting me. Also, most distinguished professor, thank you very much for these thought-provoking answers and submissions you've given to this topic. I'll be very quick with my question. I've been following your work for the past 9 years, and I was there even when you visited the Nigerian Senate and you talked about very important issues that concerns the development of Africa, and women development being one of them. So I feel maybe one of the critical questions I would like to ask you is, how do we provide a level playing field for women to be comfortable being a wife, a mother, and most probably the president of a country without compromising in any of the responsibilities I mentioned earlier? Look at Angela Merkel. What makes her successful as the president of Germany, sitting in a boardroom full of testosterone? How is she able to do that? So would we like to learn from that experience, and maybe you can share with us what you think about that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kisley. I think I'm comfortable with that.
So I'm calling out of Washington, D.C., where I'm a practitioner here. I'm also a practitioner out in Nigeria. My concern I'm a father. Let me say, I'm a father of 3 girls, first of all. So this is very key to me. So this has personal ramifications for me. When women rise up, they get catcalls, sexual harassment. Those are issues that are mundane. And just this morning, frankly, I was engaging with some of my colleagues in Nigeria in legal practice, some of my classmates in my WhatsApp group, about issues of rape, current law, and what is in Africa. If women are still subjected to those indignities, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and frankly, violence in the workplace. Those are demerits, those are issues that allow women or put women down, and women are therefore unable to participate in full force and form in matters of state and leadership positions. Those are things that when presented, there are no rules right now that govern, especially in traditional societies. I want to say all across Africa. How do we, without changing laws, how do we at this point create a strong environment, an inviting environment, a playing field that is even for women to participate in full force when those laws are still serious demerits and challenges to women who aspire?
Thank you, sir. My Prof, please, over to you.
Very
Yes,
well, sir.
yes, very well,
I
sir.
think a number of things, just of course, I'm sharing my thoughts on this in no specific order. But I think Mary from Cameroon has raised a very critical question about the whole idea of leadership as I understand it. One of the problems that I think we have had in Africa in the recent past is that anybody who occupies an office, whether there is an office of a minister or any other office in the private sector, by dint of occupation of that office is then described as a leader. My understanding is that leadership is very different. And many of you here are thought leaders in the things that you do. You don't have to hold an office in order to be a leader. In fact, good leaders bring something to the offices that they are called to occupy. And I think in Africa, because we have commercialized visible leadership, particularly political leadership, it is so commercialized that many of you know that if you want to be a multi-millionaire quickly without much effort, the avenue to follow is the avenue of politics, because it affords you opportunity to peddle influence, it affords you the opportunity to get government contracts, it affords you the opportunity to use office for personal benefit. And that is why the competition for political office is cutthroat competition, where throats are literally cut. And this cuts across the entire continent of Africa. How do we deal with this? Look at the Scandinavians, and somebody did mention about Angela Merkel, and Angela Merkel is in Germany, and one say that is a third world, it's a $5 trillion economy. Let's look at other countries, softer countries, such as the Scandinavian countries, which are social welfarist, which in many ways are very close to the way Africans would want to do things. When you make leadership and occupation of public leadership service-oriented, then people will begin to look at service delivery. And I'm now submitting that if we want to ensure that the quality of leadership is oriented towards service delivery, the quality of the followership must also improve. The African masses or the African voters are also complicit in the quality of the leaders that we find. We are so easy to manipulate in Africa by being manipulated by the politicians, either on the basis of our ethnic affiliation or the basis of the money that they give us. And I hold the view that if we can de-emphasize the things that divide us and emphasize the things that unite us, then we will be in a better space. And permit me to give an example. If you are in Accra, Ghana, if you are in Accra, Ghana, and what you want is garbage collection, you want good services and all that. Once you agree that that is the bottom line, then it will determine how you choose leadership. Which brings me to the second question by Kingsley. How do we create a level playing field? And I hold the view that a level playing field is created when you create an environment where leadership is not about salary, it's about service delivery. And you must have an architecture in your political system which allows for men and women who are of quality to seek public office. One of the reasons why we don't have women participating in politics in Africa The cat calls that you've talked about. I think that my good friend from the United States of America has talked about cat calls and those accusations and those insults. So I hold the view that that can be done, and already in Africa we have seen that being done in a number of countries. Rwanda stands out in this regard. South Sudan is beginning to do certain things which are useful in that regard. And I think Ghana is also doing a few things which are useful, which ought to be emulated, and indeed Ethiopia. And then the last question is, how do we create an environment? Which environment will ensure that women have this, as have an environment where they are not insulted, they are not subjected to abuse. Once again, and I'm saying this ad nauseum, let us not be romantic about this or romanticize this. It's not going to be easy. Those who cannot perform, particularly us of the male gender, will always want to dismiss women who are performing and say things that are not necessary. But it's the duty of the duty and at once the obligation of those women to know that when you are a pioneer, you must be insulted. Now that my friend who asked the question is in the United States of America, you remember these words of Roosevelt, which he spoke in Paris, France. It is not the critic who matters, but the doers. So do your thing confidently and ignore the insults and the abuses. History will remember you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just have a brief comment and a brief question. I'm in Atlanta here. I'm in Nigeria, like you rightly noted. My comment is, in as much as we have this drive to advance the cause of women, I think we should also need to be conscious of some limitations that are difficult, challenging to overcome. One of them is the cultural heritage of Africa, how we are raised. People are raised in most environments that women are second place. You know, our parents would rather send their male children to school and not the female children to school. Even at our level, some men, they have three, 4 children who are girls, they're still looking for males. So my point is, I think we need to address the mindset. We need a mindset revolution across all gender to make sure we are not looking at how we were raised, we're looking at the status quo, we're also looking at what the future should be. Now, my question is, given the enormous information we got from Prof and what Dr. Etai has been doing the last few years, what specifically can we do at our group level, at individual level? What can we do to champion the E for She crusade? What changes can we make individually in our lives to make that difference?
Firstly, let me also extend a profound thank you to our founder, Dr. Elisha. Thank you for this awesome work you are actually doing and trying to change narratives about how we men can get involved in changing things around the perception of women. And again, I want to say thank you, Prof. Thank you. You are inspiring change in Africa. I want to again thank you for honoring this meeting tonight. I was in your meeting in Cape Town when you spoke at the Cape Town Convention Center recently. And I think somehow I was only opportune to attend the first day. I couldn't meet with you in person. It's a pleasure listening to you again tonight. I may not have a question. I would just want to add something in terms of what my brother just asked right now about changing mindset. I'm a father of 3 girls, and for me, I feel very contented with what God has blessed me. So I believe that this change that we are hoping to see and should begin from the home. When I say begin from the home, it all starts from there, because a good home is the one that is going to make a better society out there. So I hear people say, oh, because I have all girls, I still need a male child. And the question is, why a male child? So I strongly agree with my brother there that the culture to some extent needs to be revisited. A lot of us claim we're Christians, but we're still very ungrateful when it happens that we're having only, let's say, girls. We will say, no, we still want a male child. And by then we put religion behind. So my thinking or my thought here is this change should begin from the home. And I think if we take it from there, he or she is going to work. Thank you so much, admin. Thank you for a good work you're doing. And I look forward to hear more from the Prof. Thank you.
Let me first of all thank Titus, who has given me quite a very important perspective about cultural limitations. And I think that we must not be accused of being simplistic in terms of wishing away certain very deeply rooted cultural practices, which if you talk to prefects of culture, they'll tell you that these cultures are very critical in terms of preserving societies. And I'm not one to dismiss culture. But culture is not also fossilized. Culture is dynamic. And I think that there are many cultures in Africa that are now beginning to accept that one's gender is not what determines their ability to serve. And I've seen in the recent past, and not only in the recent past, when you look at the history of quite a number of countries, one sees that women have been coming up and women have been playing critical roles in very diverse areas. So I think that even when we talk about culture in different African countries and different African communities, we are already beginning to see that education, and I'm not talking about formal education, education and exposure is beginning to send one message. You cannot afford the luxury of ignoring 50+% of your population. You've got to mainstream them. And number two, culture is not static, culture changes, and therefore our women must be allowed to participate in the building of our communities. So it is going to be a challenge. Perhaps in our lifetimes, we may not see what we desire. And it's very interesting that many of the men and women who are speaking here are fathers of girls only, just as I am. So, and the beauty of it is that I can say confidently that some of us have been liberated. We have never thought that we are inadequate because we did not have male children. And that I think is a good thing. It is a good thing because we are saying, as long as you have a child, that child is as good as any child, male or female, it does not matter. And Coach Oscar, of course, also says and supports Titus in that regard. And I think, and perhaps this is the last point that I want to make, when I look at Africa today, Africa is very diverse. Sometimes when we speak of her as if there was uniformity. Remember that we are a continent where nearly 3,000 languages and over 3,000 cultures are alive and kicking. When you are talking about the Fante or the Mende or the Zulu or the Pedi or the Shoshangane or indeed the Bakongo or the Luo or the Kikuyu or the Kamba or whichever other ethnic, the Kisi in Liberia, you are talking about people who are diverse. But I think that there is a sense in which there is beauty to that. I commend to all those who are listening to me. There is a book which you may have read, and if you have not read it, read it. It's written by Kenya's Ali Mazrui. It's called The Power of Babel, not the tower, it's The Power of Babel. And in that book, he says, if you allow me to paraphrase, that diversity is actually our strength. And that if we were to use and to harness our diversity in its different ways and dimension, Africa could realize our potential in a manner that will amaze both the continent and indeed the world. So in a nutshell, I want to say, one, that in order to ensure that our women participate actively in an environment where they feel safe, it behooves us, who we are men, to stand by them. Not to stand behind them, is to stand by them. And this is not semantics. I think you stand by them. In other words, you support them in the manner that we do, that we ought to do, and is reciprocal. They also support us. And two, to encourage them that good things don't come easily, so that even when they're insulted and abused, it is the duty of us men to ensure that we protect them. And once we ensure that that happens and we create structures where those who go beyond the bounds of decency and decorum are punished in the fullness of time, actively and effectively, and for the benefit of our societies. Let me start with the political environment. All of us know that politics is critical because the political environment defines many things. If you get your politics wrong, then it undermines many things. And I think it is your own kinsman, Chinua Achebe, in his 1983 book, The Trouble with Nigeria, who's speaking about Nigeria, and he could as well be speaking about Africa, said, the problem is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. And all of us know that. Having known that, I think that there is a sense in which many Africans who now are in the political bandwagon join politics for the wrong reason. And politics, as I said a little earlier, has become the quickest way to acquire material wealth. And I said earlier, and I repeat it again, that for that reason, political competition is cutthroat competition. And I'm not speaking metaphorically. Throats are literally cut. And because of that, the few women who choose to venture in the political arena are disadvantaged. Disadvantaged, number one, because they don't have the money that is necessary for bribing the electorate, which have now been used to being bribed by the political class. They do not have the goons who are going to unleash violence to their political opponents, and they do not have the means to engage in an environment of politics where there is no hygiene. That disadvantages the woman because African politics is not issue-based. How do we then, beyond lamentation, move away from that kind of environment? There have been different models of dealing with this. In South Africa, which I talked about a little earlier, one of the methods was to ensure that you don't have first past the post. You have a system of proportional representation where you vote for political parties and you have a party list, and a party therefore makes deliberate effort that women are included in the party list. I think it is a good method. There are other countries where you have women-only seats, and I don't like women-only seats because after a short time, men begin to say, that is an inferior seat, it is only for women. And then there is also the affirmative, that is an affirmative action way of dealing with the question of strengthening women for ultimate political participation. Then, of course, there is a method which is constitutional, that you make a deliberate effort in your constitution, where the constitution says that if there is a presidential candidate, the presidential candidate, if there is a man, there must be a running mate who is a woman. And then there is a requirement that if it is a gubernatorial seat, if the gubernatorial candidate is a man, then there must be a woman as a running mate and vice versa. Then there could also be a constitutional provision which says that if one is constituting a cabinet, that cabinet must have 50% women. I think those are methods that are being applied in different countries in different ways. And I think, as the Americans would say, the jury is still out as to which is the best method. All of us are agreed that if we allow politics to be conducted in the manner in which we have seen it being conducted, not only in Nigeria, but in many African countries, then women, given their penchant for embracing compassion and peace and decorum and dignity, will not survive in that environment, and they will always be outsiders. So I think that there must be deliberate constitutional efforts which are designed to ensure that women are included. But I'm talking about politics. There is another arena which I've already mentioned about, because I believe we are now summarizing. Outside of politics, how can women begin to participate and influence political processes? If you go into the business arena, in many African countries, including Nigeria and Ghana and Zimbabwe and Tanzania, I need not mention all of them, you now have women who are very present in this particular environment. And these are women who can be kingmakers. They can be kingmakers because they can now use their clout, whether it's in agriculture, whether it is in business, to influence decision-making processes. And I think that that is yet another area that can be strengthened. In the private sector outside of agriculture, we also have that. So in a nutshell, I want to conclude, because we cannot conclude this argument in this way, through this forum, but suffice it to say that Africa is already beginning to make strides. Let us not judge Africa too harshly, but let us not rest on our laurels. When I look at Ethiopia and I see that the president of Ethiopia is a woman, I'm happy. When I look at Tanzania and I see that the Tanzanian president or vice president is a woman, I'm happy. When I look at South Sudan and I see that one of the vice presidents is a woman, I'm happy. When I look at Liberia and I see that one of the vice presidents is a woman, I'm happy. When I look at South Africa and I see that the foreign minister is a woman, I'm happy. When I look at Kenya and I see that the defense minister is a woman, I'm happy. In other words, we are beginning to acknowledge that fact that women can play critical roles. So our duty, we who are talking about he and she, is to energize this process. I was talking about some women that I work with. Some of them I know maybe in different countries. A lady from Ghana called Dr. Dawouni, who is at the University of Howard in the United States of America, has been preaching about having women judges in the judiciary in Ghana. And you see what is happening in Ghana. The lady called Noma Mliswa in Zimbabwe, who is one of the leading women farmers. A lady called Tausi in Tanzania, who is in the United States, and Arikana Chihombori Kwao, who was representing the AU in the United States in the diaspora. Strong women. And I'm mentioning these women not because they are not other women. They are great women in the sciences, in the academia, and all these. My message, brothers and sisters, we who have chosen the path of doing this, and we are doing this at two levels. Level number one, for those who are fathers of daughters only, you are doing it for your daughters. Level number two, for us who genuinely believe that women have a contribution to make, we need to support them. Level number three, it cannot be true that we have a population the size, you've given us the statistics in Ghana, there are more women than men in Nigeria, than in Nigeria. There are more women than there are men. Nigeria will never realize our potential unless we mainstream our women. And that we must do. And we have no choice. And if we make the wrong choice, then we are doomed. But we will not be doomed.
Amen. Amen.
Prof, thank you very much. I want to announce that two of the women you mentioned who are doing so well, they're actually in the platform. They're listening to you. So when I asked one of them, I said, come, you have the biggest farm in Zimbabwe. Good enough is a member of AWLO. And I just disappeared now. But I'm happy because you are celebrating these women. You didn't even know that they are here. And, you know, this is what we're talking about. So it makes me proud. Thank you very much for acknowledging what they are doing. These are African women doing great stuff. And there's something you mentioned that is thinking, it's keep running on my brain. You said we should start using child education. Child education. This girl child days, boys child days, you know, it's actually bringing a lot of confusion. So that narrative have to change. As it keep bringing, keep coming back. If there's something I picked from this meeting, is this child education. We should try to project that. That will really help our continent. Thank you very much. Before I call the former Minister of Women Affairs of this country, a great woman, she's my mother, she's been here, but I will call her she will come in when she's giving vote of thanks. So I still plead with her there are two ministers here, pleading with, they're enjoying you, they don't want to say anything, but I know that Ijom Andene, former Minister of Women Affairs in this country, she's here, she will contribute, at the same time give us the vote of thanks, because we're winding up now. We can't, just like the professor said, we can't do everything today. We can't, it's not possible. When you have Prof, it is not possible. I know everybody wants to ask questions. Well, we'll be in Sierra Leone, Freetown. Prof will be in Freetown. So we'll have enough time to really ask these questions. But Mr. Kuku, let's hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alicia, my namesake, my brother. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I've been your ardent follower from day one. I've been in almost all your major international events. Thank you, Professor. I was privileged to hang out with you at Dr. Beasley's loft downtown Atlanta when you came with your wife.
Yeah.
And she's an awesome orator. I hope she's still doing what she did that day. Very impressive. I don't want us to belabor you. You have created a dynamic momentum. But I think it's time for younger people, because you guys are fading out. You have more than another 20, 30 years, God willing. So it's important that we group some younger people to be able to continue what you're doing. But that having been said, I am a digital transformation consultant. I believe there's always room for transformation. You know, I believe there's room for transformation at all times. And I believe in focusing on the most important aspect of what we can do, because we must at all times prioritize everything you think you can do to bring the change you want in the order of which will give you maximum return, probably the 80-20 rule that we all know about. Most of us will know about that. So I believe in the 80-20 rule, you know, and we just have a pandemic that we're still trying to deal with. Thank God the African continent has been spared the big stick, but that is a point that I think we need to look at, because I just did a show on my television, on my radio show last week that was captioned post-COVID-19, winners and losers. What are the prospects? You know, and if you evaluate what has happened in the last 90 days in our lives, which has changed forever, you will never be the same again. A whole lot of jobs that happened before COVID-19 might not return. For those of us that are living out here, we know what has been able to sustain the system, purely technology, okay? And these are opportunities that we need to, if you want to empower women to take over, nobody will give anybody power for free. We need to be straight up and understand the dynamics of power. You want to think of positioning women for power. Power will never be given for free. Even fathers don't give children their power. Nobody does that. What I want to project or probably advise for AWLO, he for she, is to be transformational, to look at identify potential opportunity where we can empower women. Because politics is about empowered people. Nobody who is not empowered could have the ball to step in and want to take over power. First of all, you must be able to empower yourself. you know. So we need to say, okay, where are the emerging opportunities? I like to say this because I believe that the African, let me throw some projections on the table. We have 1.3 billion Black people. In another 15 years, over 50% of the global workforce is expected to come out of Africa, which is why the white man is busy trying to push automation, robotics, and AI, because that ability to run a system without the human intelligence, okay? But if Africa, with the 52% woman population we're talking about here, is to provide that workforce, then it is very important for people in authority leadership, AWLO itself, because their demographics are all women. What can we do to place women to provide that 52% of that workforce in another 10 years? We're not talking about workforce to come and be babysitters. We're not talking about any other kind of job that's just going to be menial. We're talking about jobs that are paying $80,000, $100,000 a year. That's a lot of money in any language you want to talk about, okay? But until we look at build that team that could say, okay, let's evaluate the total potential post-COVID-19, who are going to be the winners?
I believe these are our concluding remarks.
Yes.
I can't agree more that going forward, technology is going to play a very critical role in this thing. I mean, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we talk about robotics and artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, but the truth be told, our actual consumption of technology is still very minimal. If you want to look at our consumption of technology, possibly, and I stand to be corrected on this, on a scale of 1 to 100, perhaps we are only doing 10%. And people are already talking about 5G. So there is a sense in which, and I want to still slant it toward the woman, that the whole idea that the woman was to be in the kitchen, the woman has long been liberated from the kitchen. The microwave did that, the cooking thing did. I mean, technology has long liberated the woman from the kitchen. So the woman is now in the boardroom. And all of us are now beginning to use technology for purposes of ensuring that we improve the quality of our lives. If we therefore, and I can't agree with more about the intervention of technology going forward, there is a good book that has been written by some Chinese American lady, and it's interesting that it's a Chinese American lady called Irene Sun, is called The Next Factory of the World. And in that argument, the lady has traveled across Africa, in Lesotho, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and she holds the view, which I support, that holding all factors constant, and remember that factors are never constant. Africa could be the next factory of the world. What are we going to do about it? And that is why I, in conclusion, must agree with Monica from Liberia. I also will have to agree with Linda, who said that it's also incumbent upon women to support women. It is, I mean, when we listen to women will tell you in their unguarded moments that when they are seeking publicly visible offices, the greatest opponents they have are their fellow women. So the first thing is that you must ensure that you have women tucked under your armpit, and when you now come to the men are ready to support your cause. But I want to conclude by saying that the world, and I'm not saying anything new, my good friend has captured it very well, post-COVID, there are people who think we are going to go back to normalcy. There will be a completely new normal. And that new normal requires that we must think differently and think not outside of the box, but think as if there was no box. To reference to. That I think, and there's this is something that has just come to my mind. I keep on saying this and ad nauseum. A friend of mine used to say, it used to be said, strike the iron while it is hot. He says, no, don't wait for the iron to be hot. You strike it so that it can be hot. And, and I think that is the attitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, my mentor. We really appreciate you, sir. We appreciate it. It's not easy. It's been 2.5 hours of serious masterclass.
Thank you.
From the master himself. I will not do the vote of thanks. I would like to invite Her Excellency, the former Minister of Women Affairs of this Federal Republic of Nigeria, Dem Young Anene. Welcome, Mommy.
First of all, by thanking Dr. Elisha Atai, giving women a voice, even if it is men like Professor LUMUMBA that is speaking for them. I want to thank you. You are doing a fantastic job for the African women. There was nothing much for us to talk. We were to listen and learn and hear from the men. And we have been talking. Women have been talking to themselves. So it is quite refreshing to hear men talking for women, talking on behalf of women. So we wanted to listen to that. It was quite empowering and enriching. AWLO has been empowering women all over. I want to thank a man that I've always admired. I can listen to Prof for hours on end. He is, you know, I call him a quintessential Pan-Africanist. I call him a library that you can never go through. I admire him so much. And I appreciate your coming to share your deep insights, your perspectives, and your wealth of knowledge with us. And I was very happy and excited when I heard our founder, Dr. Elisha, saying that we will be in Sierra Leone. If COVID-19 allows us, we'll all be in Sierra Leone. Because of you, I will be in Sierra Leone, because I will never tire from hearing from you. You have told us everything, you know, that's the truth. And for some people who think that talking about what women wear in Africa is romanticizing it, I don't think so, because if you don't know where you started, you will not know where you're going to, and you will not even know where you are. So it was a good thing to remind us that women had a place and had function in Africa. They were leaders in Africa before we were rudely interrupted by the colonial masters. And it is now for us to get back, you know, find ourselves again. It's not an easy process. It's going to take a long time, but I'm sure we will get there. I remember in 2010, I met with His Excellency Kenneth Kaunda in Abuja. And he told me that they have tried their best and that the men have failed Africa. So they are looking, he's praying and hoping that the mothers of Africa, the women of Africa, will take up the gauntlet and redeem Africa and save Africa and put Africa where it is supposed to be. Post-COVID-19, a lot of things are going to happen. The silver lining that I find in this COVID is that it gave us an opportunity to stop and think and reflect and hear a lot of things and see many things that are happening. So it's like we are going to have to press the reset button. And I can assure you that it's not a question of anybody giving over power to women. Women will take it because they know. And the world is ready for women right now. And women are ready for themselves. And I will never stop thanking Dr. Elisha, because it is one thing for you to know who you are, and it's another thing to know that for somebody else to validate that your knowledge. It gives you added empowerment. So when you talk about empowering women, Dr. Elisha and AWLO has empowered African women, has started empowering African women, has empowered a lot of African women, and we continue to empower African women. And AWLO is doing a good job grooming them. Professor PLO, I can't thank you enough. We cannot thank you enough. And you mentioned our great woman, the ambassador, Miss Ambassador Kwao. She was on a conversation like this with AWLO, and I was imagining PLO Lumumba and Ambassador Kwao, Pan-Africanists. You are liberating us. You don't mince words. You don't paper things. You say it as it is. Yes. And that's why I love you. And I will continue to admire you. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And we will never stop calling you because we like the sound of your voice.
Thank you.
We'd like to hear what you say.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am, for that very soothing words. Close this very exciting session. I want to thank Prof, my mentor, my father. I want to thank you once again for this honor. It's not easy. I took so much of your time. I know what it is. You're a very busy man. But because I know you love Africa, and I think this is the first time you see this kind of session, and I had a conversation with Ambassador Rekena an hour before the session, and she told me, you know what, Prof, okay, I'm going to come in between, but I will just sneak in and sneak out. I want to believe she came and to listen to you too, because you guys are doing strong things. You guys are doing well, and I'm happy that everybody that is here, they must be part of the movement that we're creating. And you are leading, we're following you. I will make sure that we create a new Africa so that things will never be the same after this COVID-19. Definitely, we have to, reboot and come up stronger. So I want to thank all our IFOSHI members from all over the world that came in. I want to thank our partners from the UN.
So welcome New York, and cooperate with us to do more things to support UN, support women, support peace. Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So at this point, I would like us to close. I know nobody wants to leave, but we have to close. Professor needs to go and refresh. We're going to have him live in Freetown. So the conversation starts. We just started that conversation now, and we're going to take it to the next level. The important thing is that we must put it into action. It's not just about talking about it, but we must put it into action. He's been saying it, but we cannot do it alone. We must make sure that we take something up. Personally, I keep saying it now. I've said it like 3 times. Child education. AWLO should be ready to work on this. It's something that we're going to work on. Of the IFOSHI platform, the AWLO IFOSHI, and AWLO as a whole is something that we must change the mindset of our people when it comes to education, when it comes to children education, and we have to balance it up so that we don't end up educating firebrand women that the men cannot afford to, they can't handle, so we need to balance it properly. So thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone. I will communicate after this. God bless you all.